The bells of St. Augustine's Chapel rang with solemn grandeur, their echoes rolling across the rain-darkened streets of London like a decree from heaven itself. Beneath vaulted ceilings gilded with candlelight, aristocrats gathered in silks and jewels, their faces polished into expressions of decorous interest. Yet beneath every courteous smile lurked curiosity, and beneath every whisper hid judgment. They had not come merely to witness a wedding. They had come to witness a spectacle. Lady Eleanor Ashcroft stood alone behind the chapel doors, her gloved hands trembling against the folds of ivory satin. The gown that draped her slender frame had taken months to create. Pearls shimmered along the neckline. Lace flowed from her sleeves like delicate frost. Any other bride might have looked upon her reflection with joy. Eleanor looked at hers as though she were studying a stranger. From the other side of the door came the faint murmur of voices. Poor Duke Blackthorne. He deserved better. They say her father nearly ruined half the city. And yet she still found a husband. The words drifted through the wood like tiny knives. Eleanor lowered her eyes. She had learned long ago that society preferred scandal to truth. Her father had died 3 years earlier carrying accusations he never had the chance to disprove. Debts, corruption, dishonor. The newspapers had printed every rumor with eager delight. Though no evidence had ever surfaced, the stain remained. In London, a woman inherited disgrace far more easily than fortune. The organ began to play. The chapel doors opened. 100 faces turned toward her. For one terrible heartbeat, Eleanor considered fleeing. Then dignity carried her forward. Step by measured step, she walked down the aisle. Candles flickered against polished marble. The scent of roses lingered in the air. Jewel-toned stained glass scattered fragments of colored light across the floor. Yet none of it could soften the cold scrutiny pressing upon her from every side. At the altar waited Sebastian Blackthorne, Duke of Blackthorne. Tall and impeccably dressed, he possessed the sort of presence that commanded silence without effort. Dark hair framed a face carved by restraint rather than warmth. His posture was perfect. His expression unreadable. He did not smile when she approached. He did not look displeased. He looked resigned. Oddly, that hurt more. The ceremony proceeded beneath the watchful gaze of London's elite. The minister spoke of devotion, companionship, and sacred vows. Eleanor repeated every promise with steady grace. Sebastian's voice remained calm and unwavering as he answered in turn. To the congregation they appeared a magnificent pair. Only the bride knew how lonely the moment felt. When the final blessing was given and the marriage declared complete, applause filled the chapel. Guests rose from their seats. Smiles returned. Conversations resumed. The performance was over. Reality awaited. A short time later, Eleanor followed her new husband through the corridors of Blackthorne House. The grand residence stood only a carriage ride from the chapel, its towering walls embodying generations of wealth and power. Servants bowed as they passed. Chandeliers glittered overhead. Neither spoke. At last Sebastian opened the door to a private sitting room. A fire burned quietly in the hearth. Rain tapped against the tall windows. The silence between them felt almost tangible. Eleanor folded her hands before her and lifted her chin. "Your Grace." For the first time since the ceremony, he looked directly at her. His gaze held neither cruelty nor affection. Only distance. What happened next would remain etched in Eleanor's memory for years. "Take off the wedding dress," he said quietly. "This marriage is not about true love." The word struck with astonishing force. For a moment she simply stared at him. Outside, thunder rolled across the city. Inside, something fragile cracked. Sebastian seemed unaware of the devastation he had caused. "This arrangement was necessary," he continued. "Our families required stability. Expectations had to be satisfied. I will always provide for you. You shall be treated with respect. But I believe honesty is kinder than false hope." Honesty. The word sounded almost cruel. Eleanor fought to keep her composure. Years of public humiliation had taught her many skills. Among them was the ability to suffer quietly. "I understand, Your Grace." A flicker of surprise crossed his features. Perhaps he had expected tears. Perhaps he had expected anger. Instead, she offered a graceful curtsy. Nothing more. The Duke inclined his head. The conversation ended. Later that evening, Eleanor sat alone in her assigned chamber. The wedding gown had been carefully removed. In its place she wore a simple cream dressing robe. A small fire glowed in the grate, yet the room felt cold. Beyond the windows, rain streaked the darkness. She wondered whether this would be her life now. A duchess in title. A stranger in her own marriage. Below, somewhere within the vast house, servants prepared celebrations. Guests toasted the union. Music drifted faintly through distant halls. None of it reached her heart. She moved to the fireplace and stared into the flames. They danced and twisted like memories she could not escape. The whispers, the pitying glances, the Duke's measured voice telling her exactly what she meant to him. Not a beloved wife. A duty. A solution. An obligation. The ache in her chest grew heavier. Then came a knock. Soft. Unexpected. Eleanor turned. A maid entered carrying a small velvet box no larger than her hands. "I beg your pardon, Your Grace," the young woman said. "This arrived moments ago." "From whom?" The maid hesitated. There was no name attached. The door closed behind her. Alone once more, Eleanor stared at the mysterious box resting in her lap. The velvet was midnight blue. The clasp gleamed softly in the firelight. Whoever had sent it had taken care in its presentation. Her pulse quickened. Slowly she reached for the lid. And for the first time that dreadful day, something unfamiliar stirred beneath her sorrow. Not hope exactly, but curiosity powerful enough to make her forget her tears. For several moments Eleanor simply stared at the velvet box resting in her lap. The fire crackled softly beside her, casting amber light across the midnight blue fabric. Outside, rain whispered against the windows of Blackthorne House, while distant laughter drifted faintly through corridors where guests still celebrated a marriage that felt less like a beginning than a sentence. At last she lifted the clasp. The lid opened. Nestled within dark silk lay a sapphire brooch of extraordinary beauty. The gemstone shimmered with deep blue fire, surrounded by tiny diamonds arranged like petals around a midnight flower. Eleanor recognized it immediately. She had seen sketches of the piece years ago in society journals. The brooch had once belonged to Duchess Helena Blackthorne, a woman remembered not only for her elegance but also for her charitable works and uncommon kindness. A sudden chill moved through her. Why would anyone send such an heirloom to her? There was no note. No explanation. Only silence. The mystery lingered in her thoughts throughout the following days. Blackthorne House soon returned to its normal rhythms. Guests departed. Carriages vanished from the drive. Servants resumed their duties with practiced efficiency. The grand estate settled into a quieter existence, though Eleanor still felt like an outsider wandering through someone else's life. Her husband remained courteous. He ensured she lacked nothing. Fresh flowers appeared in her rooms each morning. Every request was answered. Every comfort provided. Yet the distance between them remained unbroken. At breakfast they exchanged polite observations about the weather. At dinner they discussed estate matters. Nothing more. The walls surrounding Sebastian Blackthorne seemed built from stone stronger than any castle. Then another gift arrived. This time it was a leather-bound volume of poetry. No name. No explanation. Inside the cover she found a single pressed rose. Days later came a silver music box adorned with delicate engravings of swans gliding across a lake. Then a collection of rare novels. Then fresh white roses arranged with exquisite care. Each item carried refinement and thoughtfulness. Each arrived anonymously. Each deepened the mystery. More troubling still, each gift seemed chosen specifically for her. The books reflected subjects she enjoyed. The flowers matched her favorite varieties. The music box played a melody her mother had once loved. Someone knew her. Someone had been paying attention. For the first time since her wedding day, curiosity began to eclipse sorrow. Yet curiosity proved dangerous in London. News traveled quickly among aristocratic circles. By the second week, whispers had already begun. By the third, they spread through drawing rooms, luncheon tables, and ballroom galleries. Eleanor heard fragments wherever she went. Another gift arrived yesterday. Surely the Duke cannot be responsible. I heard a gentleman visits the estate. Perhaps the scandalous blood runs deeper than we believed. Rumors multiplied like shadows. Some speculated she had attracted a secret admirer. Others implied something far less innocent. The accusations carried familiar cruelty. Society had never forgiven her family. Now it sought fresh reasons to condemn her. One evening, Eleanor accompanied Sebastian to a grand ball hosted by the Countess of Fairmont. Crystal chandeliers illuminated vast marble halls. Golden candlelight reflected from polished floors. Violins sang beneath painted ceilings while noblemen and ladies moved through elegant dances. The scene appeared magnificent. Beneath its beauty lurked predators. Eleanor felt their eyes long before she heard their words. 3 ladies stood near a towering arrangement of roses. Their smiles vanished as she approached. "Your Grace," one woman said sweetly. How fortunate you are to receive so many gifts. Another laughed softly. Indeed. Such devotion from an unknown admirer is rather remarkable. The third tilted her head. Though perhaps not entirely mysterious. Their meaning was unmistakable. Heat rushed into Eleanor's cheeks. Around them, conversations quieted. Listeners pretended not to hear while eagerly waiting for her response. Humiliation threatened to tighten around her throat. Years earlier she might have fled. Now she simply lifted her chin. I find anonymous speculation less interesting than honest conversation, she replied calmly. The women exchanged glances. One smiled. How admirable. The insult remained hanging in the air. Before Eleanor could answer, another voice entered the conversation. Controlled. Unmistakably authoritative. My wife requires no defense from me. Silence spread instantly. Sebastian Blackthorne stood beside her. His expression revealed nothing. Yet something dangerous flickered beneath his composure. The ladies curtsied immediately. The Duke's gaze remained fixed upon them. Because her character stands considerably higher than the accusations directed toward it. The words landed with remarkable force. No raised voice. No dramatic gesture. Only certainty. No one spoke. No one dared. The women retreated moments later beneath the weight of their embarrassment. Conversation slowly resumed throughout the ballroom. Music continued. Dancing resumed. Yet Eleanor remained motionless. For the first time since their marriage, Sebastian had publicly chosen her side. Not out of obligation. Not out of politeness. Out of conviction. She looked at him. Thank you. His eyes met hers briefly. You should not thank anyone for speaking the truth. Then he offered his arm. Nothing more. Yet as they joined the dancers, something subtle shifted between them. The distance remained. But perhaps it was no longer immeasurable. That night, Eleanor returned to Blackthorne House unable to quiet her thoughts. The Duke's defense replayed endlessly in her mind. So did the mystery of the gifts. Determined to find answers, she examined every item more carefully than before. Hours passed. Candles burned lower. The estate fell silent. Finally she opened the poetry volume again. One page seemed slightly thicker than the others. Her pulse quickened. Carefully she separated the sheets. A folded note slipped free. For several seconds she simply stared at it. Then she unfolded the paper. Elegant handwriting flowed across the page. Only one sentence appeared. Some flowers bloom only after surviving winter. The breath caught in her throat. She had seen those precise letters before. Not often. Not enough to be certain. Yet certainty was exactly what began rising inside her. Slowly, Eleanor lifted her eyes toward the darkened doorway. The handwriting looked remarkably like the signature she had seen every day since becoming Duchess of Blackthorne. The note remained in Eleanor's hands long after midnight. Some flowers bloom only after surviving winter. The words themselves were simple, yet they carried a strange warmth that refused to leave her thoughts. More unsettling still was the handwriting. Every elegant stroke resembled the signature she had seen upon estate documents, invitations, and correspondence throughout Blackthorne House. Sebastian Blackthorne. The possibility seemed absurd. The Duke had made his position painfully clear on their wedding day. He had married her for duty. Nothing more. Such a man did not secretly send poetry, roses, and treasured heirlooms. And yet the evidence whispered otherwise. For several days Eleanor observed him more carefully. At breakfast she studied the calm precision with which he folded newspapers. During afternoon walks she noticed how servants relaxed when he passed, as though accustomed to fairness rather than fear. At dinner she caught fleeting expressions that vanished almost immediately, a faint amusement, a moment of concern, a shadow of loneliness. The more she watched, the less certain she became of the man she had married. Then the storm arrived. Dark clouds gathered across the countryside like advancing armies. By evening the sky had vanished beneath layers of charcoal gray. Wind bent the trees surrounding Blackthorne Manor, and rain lashed the tall windows with relentless force. Travel became impossible. Guests expected for dinner sent apologies. Several roads flooded before sunset. The enormous estate felt strangely isolated from the rest of the world. For the first time since their marriage, Eleanor and Sebastian found themselves entirely alone. She spent the afternoon in the library attempting to focus on a novel. The effort proved futile. Thunder rattled the windows. Firelight flickered across towering shelves. Every page she read dissolved beneath thoughts she could not quiet. When a servant entered carrying a message, her pulse unexpectedly quickened. His Grace requests your company for dinner. Nothing more. No explanation. At precisely 7 o'clock she entered the private dining room. The chamber was smaller than the grand hall typically used for entertaining guests. Candles glowed along the table. Rain drummed steadily against nearby windows. The atmosphere felt unexpectedly intimate. Sebastian rose when she entered. You are punctual, Duchess. I feared keeping a duke waiting might create a national crisis. To her surprise, the corner of his mouth almost lifted. An entirely reasonable concern. The faint humor eased something between them. For the first time, dinner began without tension. Conversation wandered cautiously at first. Books, music, the condition of the estate gardens. Safe topics. Yet as the storm intensified outside, the distance between them gradually softened. Perhaps isolation encouraged honesty. Perhaps loneliness recognized itself. Whatever the reason, their words became less guarded. Eleanor found herself speaking about her childhood home in Sussex. She described endless summer fields, hidden streams, and evenings spent reading beside her mother. Sebastian listened attentively. Not politely. Genuinely. When she finished, he asked questions that revealed he had heard every detail. No one had done that in years. What do you miss most? He asked quietly. The answer came without thought. Being known. Silence followed. Not uncomfortable silence. Thoughtful silence. The Duke studied the flame dancing inside a nearby candle. That is a rare thing, he said. To be known. To be understood. Something in his voice carried old sorrow. Eleanor hesitated. You speak from experience. A faint shadow crossed his features. For several moments she thought he might retreat behind his usual reserve. Instead he surprised her. My parents despised one another by the end of their marriage. The confession settled heavily between them. He spoke slowly as though opening doors long sealed. His mother had sought affection elsewhere. His father had responded with bitterness and pride. Their household became a battlefield disguised as a home. Every room carried tension. Every meal carried resentment. Young Sebastian witnessed everything. When my father died, he said quietly, he told me that love is simply the first stage of disappointment. The words hung in the candlelit air. Eleanor felt her heart tighten. At last she understood. The coldness he wore was not cruelty. It was armor. You believed him. I vowed never to become him. Thunder echoed across the manor. Rain streamed down the windows like silver tears. For a long moment neither spoke. Then Eleanor offered a small smile. My father once said the opposite. Sebastian looked up. He claimed love was the only thing capable of surviving disappointment. The Duke regarded her thoughtfully. An optimist. A stubborn one. Another flicker of amusement appeared in his eyes. The sight felt strangely precious. Hours seemed to pass unnoticed. The storm continued. The fire burned lower. Walls that had stood between them since their wedding day began to crack. Eventually courage pushed Eleanor toward the question she had carried for weeks. May I ask something? You may. The gifts. His expression changed. Instantly. Only slightly. Yet enough. What about them? Were they from you? Silence. The storm seemed louder. Sebastian looked toward the fire rather than her. For the first time that evening, uncertainty entered the room. You place considerable importance upon anonymous gifts. Should I not? His gaze returned to hers. Something unspoken flickered there. Something vulnerable. Then the moment vanished. I think, he said carefully, that some mysteries reveal themselves when the time is right. Not a denial. Not an answer. Her pulse quickened. Before she could press further, a servant entered with fresh candles. The interruption ended the conversation. Later, as Eleanor climbed the manor staircase toward her chambers, the power of the storm intensified. Wind howled through distant corridors. Rain battered the glass. Halfway up the stairs her slipper slipped against polished wood. The world tilted. A gasp escaped her lips. Then strong hands caught her. Everything stopped. She found herself standing impossibly close to Sebastian. One arm remained around her waist. The other steadied her shoulder. Neither moved. Neither looked away. The air seemed charged with something neither fully understood. The Duke's expression softened. Not dramatically. Just enough to reveal the man hidden beneath years of restraint. You are not the woman society claims you to be, he said quietly. The words struck deeper than any compliment. Because they addressed the wound she carried most. Before she could respond, he released her. Then, reaching into his coat pocket, he withdrew a velvet case. Eleanor recognized it immediately. The same midnight blue velvet. The same careful craftsmanship. Her breath caught. Sebastian placed the case into her hands. Inside rested an exquisite sapphire necklace, brilliant beneath the candlelight. "It belonged to my mother," he said. Eleanor stared at the jewels, then at him. And suddenly she understood that the greatest mystery inside Blackthorne Manor was no longer the gifts. It was the man standing before her, whose guarded eyes now held the very answer he still refused to speak aloud. The sapphire necklace remained in Eleanor's possession for 3 days before she found the courage to wear it. When she finally fastened it around her throat, she stood before her mirror in silence. The deep blue stones shimmered against her pale skin, catching the morning light that filtered through the tall windows of Blackthorne Manor. She expected to feel elegance. Instead, she felt something far more dangerous. Hope. The realization unsettled her. Hope had betrayed her before. Hope had whispered that society would eventually see the truth about her father. Hope had promised that marriage might offer companionship. Hope had died repeatedly beneath disappointment. And yet, despite every reason to resist it, something inside her had begun awakening. The days following the storm passed differently. Not dramatically. Not enough for outsiders to notice. But Eleanor noticed. Sebastian lingered longer during breakfast conversations. His questions became personal rather than polite. He listened when she spoke. Truly listened. Sometimes she caught him watching her across a room before quickly looking away. Sometimes she found herself smiling at remarks she would once have ignored. The distance between them no longer felt like an impassable ocean. It felt like a bridge slowly being built from opposite shores. Yet uncertainty remained. Neither acknowledged the growing connection. Neither spoke of the gifts. Neither addressed the emotions quietly gathering beneath every shared glance. Then everything changed. One afternoon Eleanor visited the West Wing archives of the manor. The room contained generations of estate records, correspondence, financial ledgers, and legal documents preserved by the Blackthorne family. She had entered with a simple purpose. A charitable project required historical information regarding tenant agreements. Instead, fate guided her elsewhere. Hours passed as she sorted through aging files. Dust floated through shafts of golden sunlight. Leather-bound volumes rested upon towering shelves. Silence enveloped the room. Then a particular name caught her attention. Nathaniel Ashcroft. Her father. Her pulse immediately quickened. Carefully she withdrew the folder. The documents inside were decades old. Letters, contracts, financial reports. Most appeared ordinary. Until she discovered several pages hidden between unrelated records. The moment she began reading, her hands started trembling. The accusations that had destroyed her father were there. Not merely referenced. Manufactured. Forged signatures. Altered accounts. Private correspondence discussing how responsibility could be shifted onto Nathaniel Ashcroft to protect a more powerful family from scandal. The evidence was undeniable. The disgrace that had haunted her family for years had been deliberately created. Someone had sacrificed her father's reputation to save their own. For several moments Eleanor could barely breathe. Every humiliation, every whisper, every cruel glance, all built upon lies. Tears burned her eyes. Not from sadness. From vindication. From fury. From grief for a man who had died unable to defend himself. A sudden voice interrupted her thoughts. Eleanor. She turned sharply. Sebastian stood in the doorway. His expression shifted immediately as he saw the documents in her hands. For the first time since she had known him, genuine shock crossed his face. "You knew," she whispered. The Duke approached slowly. "I suspected." The word struck hard. "You suspected?" "Only recently." "Recently?" Pain sharpened her voice. "These papers could have saved my father's name." "I know." The regret in his eyes appeared real. Painfully real. Eleanor looked away. Years of buried suffering threatened to overwhelm her. "I watched people celebrate his downfall," she said quietly. "I listened while they called him dishonest. I watched my mother die believing the world hated her husband. Do you understand what that cost us?" "Yes." "No, you do not." The words escaped before she could stop them. Silence followed. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Necessary. Sebastian accepted every accusation without protest. At last he spoke. "The family responsible is attending the Whitmore Charity Gala tomorrow evening." Eleanor stared at him. The Whitmore Gala was one of the most prestigious events of the season. Half of London's aristocracy would attend. "What are you saying?" His gaze never wavered. "I am saying the truth deserves witnesses." The following evening London glittered beneath thousands of lanterns. Carriages crowded the streets. Music drifted from open ballroom windows. Inside the Whitmore estate, crystal chandeliers illuminated enormous halls filled with nobility, politicians, financiers, and socialites. Every influential voice in society seemed present. Every person who had once whispered about Eleanor Ashcroft stood somewhere within those rooms. For years she had feared their judgment. Tonight she feared nothing. The evidence rested securely inside her reticule. Sebastian remained beside her. Not ahead. Not behind. Beside. The distinction mattered. As the evening progressed, anticipation tightened like a drawn bowstring. Conversations flowed. Champagne sparkled. The orchestra played. Then the moment arrived. Sebastian requested the attention of the room. Gradually conversations faded. Hundreds of eyes turned toward him. The Duke rarely sought public attention. When he spoke, people listened. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began calmly, "a grave injustice has remained unchallenged for far too long." The ballroom fell silent. Eleanor felt her heartbeat thunder inside her chest. Sebastian continued. His voice remained steady, precise, unyielding. He presented the evidence. The forged documents. The manipulated accounts. The conspiracy. Every detail unfolded before London's elite. Shock spread visibly throughout the crowd. Faces paled. Whispers erupted. Several influential men attempted objections. The documents silenced them. Truth possessed a power rumors never could. Within minutes the foundation of a decades-old lie began collapsing. Eleanor stood motionless amid the chaos. For years she had imagined this moment. She expected triumph. Instead she felt relief. Pure, overwhelming relief. The burden she had carried since girlhood was finally breaking apart. The family responsible could no longer hide. Society could no longer pretend ignorance. Justice had finally entered the room. As applause unexpectedly rose from portions of the crowd, Eleanor turned toward Sebastian. Their eyes met. Neither spoke. Neither needed to. Something profound had changed. The Duke had not merely defended her reputation. He had fought for her father's honor as though it mattered as much as his own. The realization shook her more deeply than any declaration could have. Then, before the astonished gathering of London's highest society, Sebastian reached for her hand. The ballroom seemed to stop breathing. His fingers closed gently around hers. His gaze never left her face. "The greatest mistake of my life," he said clearly, "was believing that affection is a weakness." A collective gasp swept through the room. Eleanor's heart stumbled. Yet even as hope surged forward, another memory rose to meet it. Take off the wedding dress. This marriage is not about true love. The wound still existed. The words still lived between them. And as the orchestra slowly began a waltz, Sebastian stepped closer and lowered his voice so only she could hear. "There remains one truth," he whispered, "that I have not yet found the courage to confess." Then he offered his hand for the dance, leaving Eleanor staring at him as the entire ballroom disappeared around them. For several heartbeats Eleanor could do nothing except stare at the hand Sebastian had extended toward her. Around them, the ballroom remained suspended in anticipation. Crystal chandeliers glittered overhead. The orchestra waited. Hundreds of aristocrats watched from the edges of the room. Yet all of it seemed distant. The only thing she could hear was the echo of two conflicting memories. Take off the wedding dress. There remains one truth I have not yet found the courage to confess. The man who had spoken the first words stood before her now carrying the weight of the second. Slowly, Eleanor placed her hand in his. The orchestra began to play. They moved across the polished floor beneath a cascade of golden light. For a time neither spoke. The silence felt meaningful rather than uncomfortable. Sebastian guided her through the dance with practiced confidence. His hand rested lightly at her waist. His gaze rarely left her face. At last Eleanor gathered the courage she had spent weeks searching for. What truth remains? A shadow crossed his features. Not fear. Regret. The distinction mattered. "I owe you more than an explanation," he said quietly. "I owe you honesty." The music carried them through another turn. "I sent every gift." Though she had suspected as much, hearing the admission still stole her breath. "The brooch," she whispered. "Yes." "The books?" "Yes." "The roses?" A faint smile touched his mouth. "Especially the roses." Emotion tightened unexpectedly inside her chest. "Why?" The question emerged softer than intended. Sebastian's gaze lowered briefly. When he spoke again, his voice carried a vulnerability she had never heard before. Because I noticed you. The confession seemed almost painfully simple. Yet it struck harder than any grand declaration. You noticed me before our marriage? Long before. The ballroom vanished. Only his voice remained. He spoke of evenings years earlier when he had observed her from across crowded gatherings. Of charity events where she had quietly helped servants no one else acknowledged. Of moments when she had endured cruelty without sacrificing dignity. Of conversations she likely never remembered but he never forgot. Each memory felt astonishingly specific. A man could not recall such details without genuine attention. And genuine attention could not exist without feeling. You admired me, she said softly. The Duke exhaled slowly. I fought it. Why? Because admiration becomes attachment. His eyes met hers. And attachment becomes love. The final word settled between them. Not dramatic. Not theatrical. Simply true. Eleanor's heartbeat quickened. For weeks she had dreamed of hearing such honesty. Now that it had arrived, she found herself afraid. Not of him. Of hope. Then why marry me as though I meant nothing? Pain flashed across Sebastian's face. The wound she carried was now visible between them. The wound created on their wedding day. For several moments he struggled to answer. When he finally spoke, every word carried unmistakable remorse. Because I was a coward. The admission stunned her. A duke rarely confessed weakness. A man like Sebastian never did. Yet he continued. I loved you before our marriage, Eleanor. That terrified me. The orchestra swelled around them. I had spent years convincing myself that love destroys people. My parents devoted themselves to misery. Every lesson I learned taught me that affection becomes suffering. His voice lowered. Then I was told I must marry the one woman I could not stop thinking about. Eleanor felt tears gathering. Not from sadness. From understanding. At the chapel, he continued, I believed distance would protect me. The memory cut through both of them. Take off the wedding dress. This marriage is not about true love. I convinced myself that if I denied my feelings, they would disappear. A bitter smile touched his lips. They only grew stronger. The dance ended. Neither moved. Applause filled the ballroom. Neither heard it. For the first time since their wedding day, every truth stood exposed. No secrets remained. No misunderstandings survived. Only choice. Eleanor could see it clearly. The future rested in her hands. A future built upon forgiveness. Or one built upon pride. Sebastian released her hand. Not because he wished to. Because he believed she deserved freedom. If you cannot forgive me, he said quietly, I will understand. The vulnerability in those words affected her more deeply than any declaration of love. This powerful duke, feared and respected throughout England, stood before her with nothing protecting him. No title. No authority. Only his heart. And hearts were always fragile. Without another word, Sebastian turned and left the ballroom. Eleanor watched him disappear through the crowd. For several seconds she remained motionless. Then realization struck. The man who had once hidden from love was no longer running. He had finally told the truth. Now she was the one being asked to choose. An hour later a carriage carried her through moonlit streets toward St. Augustine's chapel. The same chapel where everything had begun. The same chapel where her heart had first broken. She had received a note shortly after leaving the gala. Only a single sentence appeared. If there is any possibility of forgiveness, meet me where I first failed you. The chapel door stood open when she arrived. Hundreds of candles illuminated the sanctuary. Their golden flames transformed the darkness into warmth. White roses lined the aisle. Soft music drifted through the air. The sight stole her breath. Sebastian stood near the altar. Alone. Waiting. For a moment neither moved. Then Eleanor noticed something resting upon a nearby chair. An ivory wedding gown. Her wedding gown. The very dress he had once rejected. Emotion flooded through her. Sebastian approached. Slowly. Gone was the distant duke she had married. Gone was the guarded man hiding behind duty. Only Sebastian remained. The man who loved her. The man who had finally learned courage. When he stopped before her, his eyes shone with sincerity. On our wedding day, he said, I asked you to remove that dress because I believed love had no place in my life. Silence filled the chapel. The candles flickered gently. Eleanor felt tears slipping down her cheeks. Sebastian continued. Today I ask something very different. His voice faltered slightly. Not from uncertainty. From emotion. I ask you to wear it because there is no future I desire without you. The words entered the deepest places of her heart. Every wound. Every fear. Every lonely moment. They touched all of them. For a long time Eleanor simply looked at him. Then she stepped forward. The distance vanished. "You hurt me," she whispered. "I know. You broke my heart. I know. Do you intend to spend the rest of your life making amends?" A faint, hopeful smile appeared. "Every day." At last Eleanor laughed through her tears. The sound echoed beautifully beneath the vaulted ceiling. Then she lifted her hands and gently touched his face. The gesture carried more forgiveness than words ever could. "I believe my father was right," she said softly. Sebastian's brow furrowed. "About what?" "That love survives disappointment." For a moment neither spoke. Then he gathered her into his arms. The embrace felt like arriving home after years of wandering. Outside, the city remained unchanged. Society would continue gossiping. New scandals would emerge. New judgments would be formed. Such things were inevitable. But inside St. Augustine's chapel, something far more powerful had prevailed. Not duty. Not reputation. Not fear. Love. The quiet, steadfast kind that grows slowly through misunderstanding, sacrifice, forgiveness, and truth. And as the candles shimmered around them and dawn's first light began to touch the stained glass windows, the wedding dress he had once rejected became the symbol of the life they now chose together. A life built not upon obligation, but upon a love strong enough to survive winter and bloom at last.